Thank you to Paula. Thanks for the Danville Chamber. It's great to be here. I'm happy that you arranged the weather for me so nicely. It's a couple of months away from O'Hare delay season for me, so that's where I do most of my work in the winter, is in the little cubicle that you see miserable people working in as you walk by in the airport. But, you know, all good today, and we're here to talk a little bit about Washington, D.C. from 30,000 feet. You know, this is a perfect sized crowd to really get into a discussion and a dialogue. So I'd rather not talk at you. I'd rather you all stop me as we go through. I promise to sort of wrap up by 1, and then I can stay. I've got a couple of meetings in Louisville this evening, but I can stay as long as you all want. And then we can kind of dive more deeply into get more granular on specific issues that you guys care about. But please stop me and interrupt me. And you know, this time last year I was dodging tomatoes and shoes during the healthcare debate, so you're not going to offend me with any of your questions. So so please bring them at me. But let's dive into it. As was mentioned, I'm in the Chicago satellite office of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So not from D.C., not here to help you, but most of us are, and we keep the elected officials that you send to Washington on your behalf really honest on what they kind of their government philosophy and their stump speeches they go around and give to you guys and girls in the district. Really hold their feet to the fire on votes in Washington, D.C. And then every year we come out with an electoral scorecard that you can use, that you can go to our website and find. It's how they voted, and I can give you the website if you want afterwards. But to see how your local officials voted, and as we all know, there's something coming up in November 2nd, that should be of great importance to all of you, and to all Kentuckians and to all Americans, and that's the midterm vote. And a very consequential one this year. It's probably almost more so than we've seen in recent past on business community, business-related issues. And we can talk a lot about the election. I promise to be as down the line as I can. We certainly do endorse at the congressional level. We do not endorse at the presidential level, no matter what you read or hear or anything like that. We stay out of Frankfurt. We let the great Kentucky Chamber and Paula and everybody else deal with the local and state stuff. But we do endorse at the congressional level, and we endorse congressmen and women. We can go down the line and talk about where we think everyone stands on our issues on that front. You might see us up in the air, depending on where you live, on some of the federal races right now going on this cycle as well. So I'd love to talk about politics. I'd love to talk about legislation. A little bit about Washington, D.C. I was there. I did my time. Everyone talks about it like it's jail. You know, I did my time in D.C. and then I moved on to whatever. I love the experience. It was great. You know, some of the things coming out of D.C. You know, it's an industry town, but other industry towns, you know, Hollywood, at least they produce something. I don't know what D.C. produces except for hot air, but it's a great place to live, and it's a fun time. So we can talk about that as well. Whatever you guys want to talk about. Let's start. I've got some slides here. We're not going to go through them, you know, slide by slide, but a little bit of a checklist as far as where we have been this Congress, you know, dating back almost 2 years now, and then what we still have on the plate, a lot, I think, is the answer, and where we're going to go going forward after the elections. As you may know, there's something called a lame duck session that generally takes place after each election, and so it's the period of time before the new Congress is sworn in January that members of Congress are still your elected officials, even though you may have voted them out of office. And it's a period of time where at least those folks are certainly unaccountable to you as far as what they're going to vote on and their priorities in D.C. So depending on how the elections fall, there's just as many prognostications and predictions and crystal balls as it relates to legislation and lame duck period as there are with the electoral results. And certainly, I'd encourage you to get into your local office pool on all those. We talked about a little at the table what the predictions are as far as November 2nd. I'd be happy to give you mine, although I don't know how much they're worth. And if anyone really does and says they know exactly how these things fall, I have a bridge somewhere I'd like to sell you, because you really can't say it's an eternity away. There could be, just this morning there was a terrorist alert in Europe that they're kind of going on high alert there. So anything can change the dynamics of these things. And when you get to it, it's still two candidates. It's all politics, it's local, and so that dynamic is always there as well. But let's talk a little bit about what we've done in D.C. and what they've done so far this year. Certainly the stimulus bill, that was kind of the first signature piece that passed, and I think we know a lot about that. Healthcare reform, I'm going to get a little bit into, because raise your hands if you know everything about this bill. I mean, there are people who have read the whole thing, and it's I try to be as green as possible, but it's like 2,000 some pages like stacked up to here, and then you really need all the pages of federal statute and all the codes that it actually amends and changes. So that's times 10 to 50 more. So the people who say that they know a lot, we're still getting our arms around it. Speaker Pelosi famously said now that we've passed the bill, they can start getting their arms around it as well, which is good. But so I think there's a lot to get into on healthcare reform. There's some specific dates that you need to know about. There's some specific choices that you need to know about. One of the handouts I gave you is this employer considerations, the employer mandate, free rider provision, quote unquote. That's kind of the next essential question that you're going to be dealing with as an employer, to cover or not to cover. And there are certain employers that they're going to be facing this very tricky and consequential decision whether or not they offer coverage. Others, depending on your size, might be eligible for temporary tax credits to be able to provide coverage to your employees. I haven't seen a lot of people and a lot of companies and a lot of employers that have been able to take advantage of those that fit the right niche that the government has decided that you're eligible for a tax credit to help, temporary tax credit to help provide insurance for your employees. On healthcare, we had skin in the game. 170 million folks in this country get their health insurance through their employer, and our members came to us, more than 2 years ago, before this president was elected, and said, "Hey, listen, this is a priority for us, the business community. The status quo is untenable. The cost curve was going up and outstripping the rate of core inflation 3 or 4 times the rate of inflation. So, we can't continue down this track now." Why then did the U.S. Chamber of Commerce not sign on to the final bill or bills? Well, we didn't think that was really going to address the cost curve. We thought that raising $500 billion in taxes, another $500 billion in Medicare cuts, combined with some state exchanges, that the exchange idea might be great. Can't purchase across state lines. There's no tort reform included in the package, and I think Howard Dean, very candidly, the former DNC chair, said it best when he said, "Listen, this is a third rail for Democratic politics. We're not going to go into an election year and offend the trial lawyer." So, there are good things in the bill. There's a lot of bad things. On the whole, we didn't think it was the right idea, the right prescription, and so forth. So we opposed the final bill. That doesn't mean that we're part of the repeal in the place crowd. Doesn't mean that we're part of the constitutional challenge crowd either. We want to try to improve the bill. There are things in there that work. Healthcare IT, for example, it's part of the stimulus as well. Let's not throw that out. So let's work and improve wellness is another one. Wellness and prevention. That's something that everyone can kind of agree on. So that's part of it as well. Let's dig down a little bit deeper in healthcare, and then I want to leave time for all the other stuff. The other thing, financial services reform, is the Wall Street bill. But if there's community bankers in here, if there's folks in here that small business owners that are having trouble accessing credit, you will know, and you may unfortunately know to a greater extent, this is not just a Wall Street bill. This is a Main Street bill as well. It creates a new federal regulator to add to the alphabet soup of regulators that financial services companies have to deal with, called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, that really has unlimited powers, is unchecked. It's headed by another bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., and could further stifle access to credit to local to small businesses here locally as well. So that's another piece that we can talk about as well if you want to go more in depth than that. The rest, I think, the next big issue, and we can get to this, is tax cuts. That's going to be the when businesses out there, and this was our mantra going back a year or two, right when we started seeing healthcare and cap and trade and other things percolate. This uncertainty the business community is facing, is the #1 deterrent coming from Washington, D.C. If you're a business, and this is the bottom line, in my opinion, and you don't know what your health care costs are going to be because the regulations haven't been written, some members of Congress don't even know what they voted on, etc. And there's the implementation dates that are coming. Do they happen? Do they not? What does the IRS regulations come out and say? What is your grandfathering status? What's your employer mandate provisions? How does that apply to you? How big are you? Healthcare costs is a big question mark. Energy costs. Will they pass a cap and trade bill? Will it look like something that passed the House, Waxman-Markey? Will it look something more palatable that includes global competitors to the U.S. and that doesn't tie our one hand behind our back competitiveness-wise? So the energy costs, that's a question mark as well. Labor. We've heard a lot about the Employee Free Choice Act. Who hasn't heard about the Employee Free Choice Act? Card check. Everyone has. And so and I'm telling you, the next phase on a lot of these things, but especially on labor, depending on how the elections go, is going to be regulatory. The battles are going to be at the regulatory level, especially if Congress flips. So labor, that's another fixed cost that you should know that you don't know. And it goes on from there. But the big one is tax liability. What is your tax liability going to be in a couple of months, come January 1st, 2011? All the 01 and 03 tax cuts expire. So that's your marginal rates for your individual taxpayers. Also for those small businesses that a lot of people in DC forget about, the small businesses in here that file as LLCs or S corporations, you're a pass-through. So you're putting that business income on your personal income liabilities, and you're being taxed as increasingly wealthy. The problem is a lot of people, I think, in Danville and other places out locally are waking up and then finding themselves being labeled wealthy, but they're not making any more money. The government is just classifying them differently, and that's a problem. Also the estate tax. Small farmers in here, small family farmers in here, anyone? Sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. Certainly they're worried about what happens come January 1, 2011, when the estate tax goes from zero, it sunsetted last year, to zero, to now pre-2001, 2003, so pre-Bush tax cuts, back up over 50%, and the threshold comes way down. If you're a small family farmer or someone who owns a larger estate, trust your progeny or walk down stairs very carefully in the next couple of months here, because it's very advantageous for you to die this year as opposed to next year. But so all those things, tax, labor, your energy liability, and certainly healthcare, add up to a big question mark as far as your liabilities go on your balance sheet, and it's hard to invest. It's hard to plan. That's why there's a bunch of capital parked on the sideline right now, and that's part of the uncertainty that we've been telling Congress. Hey, listen, alleviate this. That's the job to bill you can do, and it costs us, by the way, zero in a kind of pay-go environment and a budgetary crunch. We have $1.4 trillion in deficit spending this year. Projected. Last year, this is improvement, by the way. Last year was 1.7 trillion, so we're making improvement. But $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Sooner or later, talking about real money. That joke used to be a billion, but that doesn't register now in Washington D.C. anymore. But so a lot of things to talk about. Let's quickly go into healthcare. I don't want to go through all these slides. I do like an hour presentation on healthcare alone, so we can't talk about all of them. But we talked a little bit about what we supported. A lot of that stuff's in there. Tort reform certainly isn't in there at all. How we got here, we all remember this. The House passed their bill in November of last year. The Senate followed and passed their bill with a lot of hand-wringing, right, on Christmas Eve. There was I think the pork as it relates not to earmarks, but to specific member-related provisions put in the bill to get to 60, to count to 60. We remember the Cornhusker kickback, Bill Nelson from Nebraska. We remember the Louisiana Purchase. This is where the Louisiana Purchase is a great one, by the way. A Democratic senator from Louisiana was acquired through that one. Or swayed, I'm sorry, through that. And it was if your state registered as a federal disaster area over the last 5 fiscal years, then